Welcome to the Land Your Bet Sports Betting Show. 5-2 on Tuesday night in the WNBA semifinals. Going to be looking at both these game threes, giving you my in-depth looks at the matchups as well as player props that I'm eyeing and going to be betting on here for both these game threes. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and hit the like button as we dive right into Connecticut back at home against the Minnesota Lynx. Connecticut is 2.5-point favorites back at home, -122 on the money line for the home squad, and 151.5 is the total that we're looking at between these two low-scoring teams. Let's run through the box score real quick from game 2 to see some of the transitions that were made and the adjustments and how things added up to a 7-point victory for the Lynx versus that loss in game 1. First thing I'm looking at here is three-pointers. I mean, for game 2 for the Sun, 5 for 20, 25%. The Lynx outscored them by 9 points from three-point line, 42% that they shot. Big contrast to game 1. As you can see here, I'm pulling up game 1 box score to see that we went 9 for 22 for Connecticut in this game, 41% versus the 25% in game 2 that they just hit. This is game 1 rather. Then you've got the three-point stuff for the Lynx, 5 for 20, 25% from deep. Obviously a big turnaround. That's what the Sun shot in game 2. So a bunch more points. You had 12 more points from deep for the Sun in this game. And then you had about 9 more points in game 2. So three-pointers are proving to be huge in this series, especially as you look at other important factors like points in the paint, second chance points, fast break points. Those three really key categories that, you know, the Sun really usually dominate those. They have been winning them, and that's why they won one game and honestly lost the next game, because even in game 2, as you can see here, 8 more points in the paint for the Sun. They only had 1 more second chance point, but 7 more fast break points, right? Now, in game 1, that was a much bigger disparity. You can see the Sun dominated much more so, 13-8 on the second chance, 10-5. So it was still them winning that stuff, but really what it came down to was the threes. When they outscored the Lynx from deep, they won. When the Lynx outscored them by 12 points from deep, they lost by 7. So it doesn't matter how well they play in their key areas if they're not stopping the Lynx from hitting threes. As we dive into these player props, go ahead and hit that like button. Also want to let you know that we do have the VIP Discord available. Link is in the description of the video. Up 22 units on the WNBA, like I said. So if you're interested in getting some more of that, got NFL plays up 8 units in the NFL so far, as well as the NBA, where we dominated, had 40 units up last year. So go ahead and check the links out in the description of the video. Got a sale in there for you guys if you're interested. Looking at these player props, though, kicking it off with Marina Mabrey. And here's what I'm looking at with Marina Mabrey. I've got to go back to it. Now, there's some plays that you can make based on the matchup. There's some plays that you can make based on averages. And for Marina Mabrey, the way that her minutes have increased in the playoffs, that's what I'm really honing in on as a big reason to bet on her overs. So I think the points is a good look for her. I don't feel as comfortable with the assists as I did at one point because of the fact that Veronica Burton and Ty Harris are on the floor a lot more. They're going to be much more of a facilitating role than Marina Mabrey, who's going to now start to be more of a shooter, right? So I'm actually leaning to the under on the assists at 3.5. It's now at -180, so there's no juice there to take it. But the points at 15.5, which have dwindled, I don't think those are going to be impacted. Even with Ty Harris back, you can see here 38 minutes that she played in this last game, and that's been her in the playoffs, 38, 38, 39, and 32. And after game 1, Coach White realized for the Sun, I need Marina Mabrey in there at all times. So she's now playing basically the whole game with like a few minutes of a blow here and there. So we're going to continue to believe in her usage, because when you take a look at her season averages, 14.9, if I come over to props.cash as opposed to props madness for a minute, and I look at Marina Mabrey here, I can see on the season, she's at 14.9 points in 31.4 minutes. So if I extrapolate her averages out to the 38 minutes that she's now averaging in the playoffs, that gets us to at least 16 points in this game. I know it's a little bit of a stretch, but the amount of shots that she's taking does lead us to really like that as well. If you look at that in the playoffs here on props.cash, you can see that the shot attempts, now they were down to 14 in this last game, but she actually just slowed down in the second half a ton, as honestly, they didn't even really key in on her. She just didn't shoot the ball well at all in the second half. So I'm going to continue to fade that recent result and look at the amount that she shot the ball. Think that it's going to happen again and bet her overs on the points. Next up, I've got Dewana Bonner here. And with her, I'm looking at both points and rebounds. Starting with why I'm looking at the rebounds, there's a couple things happening. We saw in this last game, Bree Jones, as predicted in the other video, it's why we took her unders on both points and rebounds. Bree Jones played 13 minutes in game 2 after only playing 18 minutes in game 1. I said she's not made for this series because she gets run off the court when the Lynx run pick and roll. She just can't guard it. Let's just put it that way. Alana Smith is a deep threat. Bree Jones can't play on the perimeter. She's not able to play in this series as a result. And as a result of that, DeWanna Bonner is needed to play down low a bit more and guard Alana Smith and the main big on the floor for the Lynx at all times, including Myisha Hines-Allen, who she was guarding when Alana Smith came off the floor in the last game. So with the fact that she's playing a lot more down low and guarding bigs, that's why I do tend to lean towards her rebounds. 6.5 is just a really high number. It's still right below her season averages, but with her minutes going up as they have, you can see in the playoffs here, 34 minutes, 33 minutes, and 34 minutes in her last 3. In that first game against the Fever that they won by a good amount, 31 minutes. So she's got her minutes are back up. Her points and rebounds are up, and her points, because the key thing with DeWanna Bonner here is going to be how she plays in the playoffs. So if you look at her in the playoffs so far this season, she's going up in minutes and she's going up in shot attempts, 11, 14, 17, and 15. Right, so she's averaging about 15 shots per game in the playoffs. If you look at her in the regular season, which this is a great use of props.cash, is the ability to just go and quickly see, I'm on DeWanna Bonner now, taking it to just 2024, I can easily see her minutes average 32 minutes per game. If I put that on the playoffs, she's at 33. So she's up a minute per game, but it's the shot attempts that are a big deal. In the playoffs this year, 14. Dating all the way back to last year, it's up at 15 in the playoffs, which is a big rise from her regular season, which you can see at the field goal attempts during the regular season was at 12.9. So almost a couple more shots per game for DeWanna Bonner in the playoffs with just a minute more. She definitely turns it on a lot more. And I think the call here is her points and rebounds. If you look at her points and rebounds over the course of the playoffs since last season, and I'm looking at her last basically 12 playoff games, this is 11. This is a nice hit rate of 9 over 11, averaging 25.5 points and rebounds. So pretty comfortably over this number. Now, granted, in this year's playoffs, everything's a little bit down. There's more players around her like Marina Mabry and Dejanay Carrington, who are playing a lot better and weren't on the team to be able to help them out in recent years. But still, she's still getting comfortably over this number, at least on average here at 24 or so per game. That's a 2-point difference there. I think with the amount of minutes she's playing, she's good for the points and rebounds. If you do want to continue to take a look at a few more things in a live show, going to be going live 5:30 p.m. Eastern here on Friday, a couple hours before these games tip off. Bring your bets, jump in the comments. We have a good time looking at stuff, and I show you all the tools that I'm using to get these plays. But let's move on to Bridget Carleton, our first Lynx player that we're looking at. And I think Bridget Carleton is a good look for a couple of reasons. Number one, her minutes are way up. If you look at her over the course of the last roughly, let's say 10, 20 games of the season, on the season, she's at about 30 minutes. In the last 20, those minutes go up pretty considerably. And you can see that especially on props.cash. Once again, if I go to Bridget Carleton and I put up her numbers for the season and not the playoffs, you can see her minutes are about 30.4. If you look at the last 10 games, those minutes are up to 32.7. And specifically in the playoffs, she's been seeing a lot more minutes, which is why her PR are up at 16 per game, over in 3 of 4. The minutes she's looking at here, 35, 36, and 36. Now, she only played 27.5 in this last game because she had 3 fouls by the second quarter with 6 minutes left in the second quarter. That cost her 6 minutes of play at the end of that first half. And then at that point, her rhythm was way off by the time she got back in the third quarter, and she really didn't do much in the second half. So she didn't get to the PR here, but that was in much fewer minutes. So I think as long as she stays out of foul trouble, which is something that she normally does, this is a really good look in a situation where her minutes should be up at about 34 per game. You give her 34 per game, which is about 4 extra minutes here, and her points and rebounds are going to look really good, especially if you give her 34 plus minutes right here and we filter it out on Props Madness. This is her minutes that I have, and I'm filtering them up to, let's give her 32 or even 33, because that's what she's averaging in the playoffs. But on the season, if you give her, and I'm going up in games here, it's a 9 out of 13 hit rate that she gets the over 13.5 PR, averaging 15.5. So it's a really nice hit rate in this situation that I think we're going to face in this game, which is her continued rise in minutes. Another one, looking at Kayla McBride, also on the Lynx here, and I think she's a pretty solid under. Now, she's at 13.5 points on FanDuel now, and that's actually dropped. You see on most books still at 14.5. And I think that's the play for Kayla McBride. This is a matchup play because you can see head-to-head versus this Connecticut squad, Kayla McBride does not get these points. Now, 14.5 is still available, and that's the number that I would play. Once you get to 13.5, the edge is a little bit gone. You do get better odds, but if you can get the -130 on Caesars, I think that's the best bet for fading Kayla McBride in this game. You look at the head-to-head stuff, it's not just the points not getting there for her, it's the amount of shots she's even able to take. She's right at about 10 or 11, which is what her normal averages are, but these looks are not the same. She's getting the Dejanay Carrington treatment, defensive player of the year, or most improved player of the year, and a first team all-team defender in the league. So that's a big reason for this, is she's getting all of the Dejanay Carrington minutes with her being guarded by Kayla being guarded by her. The key thing for Kayla is that she really relies on teams sagging off of her as a spot-up shooter, to be honest. She's not involved in the pick and roll stuff. And if you look at the way on Props Madness that the Sun defend, right, they really don't play off of the spot-up shooters. They are, on the season, they were the top team against spot-up shooters because they don't need to double on that two-man action that Napheesa plays with either Courtney Williams or Alana Smith, right? And so with that in mind, like, most of Kayla's stuff comes off of Napheesa or Courtney Williams or even Alana having a decent look or a mismatch that ends up with Kayla McBride wide open on the wing because someone needs to sag off and help down low, right? So without that ability against this Sun squad who plays straight up and doesn't have to play off of their man because they can play 2v2 defense with Bonner and Alyssa Thomas as well as anybody, really good reason to continue to fade Kayla McBride points against this team. I still don't know how I could tell anybody to fade playoff Alyssa Thomas at 32.5 points, rebounds, and assists. It's a very high number. It's not something that she did during the regular season, 27.7. So this is way over her season averages. But this isn't the regular season. This is the playoffs. And she's still playing about the whole game at this point in the playoffs. She played all of last game. And if we look at props.cash, we can do an even better job of seeing the points, rebounds, and assists for her in her last 11 games in the playoffs. She's over an 8. She's averaging 36.2. So this number, like I said, last game, I still think this is a good play up to over 34.5 points, rebounds, and assists for AT, who has the ball in her hands on every possession at some point, if not for the majority of the possession. It's always coming right back to her at the top of the key. That's what this offense is predicated on. It also allows her to take whatever shots she wants from the elbow in, and it allows her to get a lot of rebounds both on the offensive side and the defensive side of the floor. So I'm going to continue to bet on her at 32.5, 33.5, and probably even 34.5 if it should get there. Even if this comes close and doesn't hit next game, we still got to keep coming back to her with the usage and the minutes that she's playing. Running through some of the other players, Dejanay Carrington also at her averages. Most of these players don't have beatable lines, even in the matchup or in any way that I could find. Dejanay going to be right at about 13.5 points, 4.5 boards, and the points and rebounds, which are a popular play, at 18.5. Season averages, she's not much over her season averages in minutes when it comes to this stuff. You can see in the playoffs, she is going to be at about 31 moving forward. She played 40 in game 1 against the Lynx, but that was also now without Veronica Burton, or excuse me, without Tyasha Harris, who's back. And that's going to be one person who does eat into Dejanay's usage and minutes. She was at 31 here. That's not enough minutes for me to take over on these slightly inflated prop lines from her regular season averages. You look at Napheesa, she's struggled mightily against this team. I don't have the cojones to fade Napheesa, but especially in the last two, obviously in the first two of this series, and you look at in the playoffs in general, she crushed it against the Mercury. This ain't the Mercury. So her line's staying at about 19.5, 20.5. That seems very fair. It's just going to come down to whether or not she makes them. She didn't even really take that many in this last game. You can see took only 14 shots. If that's not up above 16 to 20, then I don't like it nearly as much. And that's because the Mercury couldn't guard her, and this Connecticut Sun team is very equipped at doing so. And then closing out with Courtney Williams, she was someone I do like to bet on, but this 11.5 point prop is too high for me. This needs to be at 10.5 for me to take it, with her shooting the amount of shots that she does, usually at about 10 to 12 shots, 11, 12, 12. And in this last game, she took 13, but she got hot, right? And she went 4 for 4 from the line. Not as she doesn't get to the line that often on the season. You can see that all on props.cash as well. If you pull up Courtney Williams, all this stuff is right around her averages, and without the shot attempts there, I just really don't like it. Even if you look at the regular season, she just doesn't get the minutes. She was at 26.7 minutes during the regular season per game. You look at in the playoffs, it's still a similar, very similar number, 27.4. So her stuff doesn't go up that much. She's still in a pretty decent rotation with the backups here on the Lynx. So there's not much of an edge to the over at 11.5. If anything, I'm leaning under against, once again, a really tough matchup for her, as she's oftentimes getting Dejanay Carrington. Moving on to the Liberty and the Aces. Back in Vegas, we got a 2.5 point spread here with the Liberty now dogs on the road, plus 130 on their money line, and a 166.5 total after this game went to 172 in game 2, where it was at a 164.5 total. Digging through the box score to see what matters here. Got to look at three-point shooting once again. I've got box score for game 2 up, and you see the Aces shot lights out. 12 for 27 from deep. That was better than the 9 for 29 that the Liberty shot. So they did get about 9 more points off of threes in this game. Liberty got 1 more point off the free throw line, but this is huge because in game 1, it was a much wider disparity, right? It was a 10-point game, and the three-point shooting for the Aces much worse, only 7 for 25 there, and the Liberty were lights out a lot more, 8 for 19, much more efficient with their threes, also dominated from the free throw line, 7 more points from the free throw line in game 1, but in game 2, as I just showed you, that was a lot closer, only 1 more point for the Liberty in that one, and they both had a very similar amount of free throws. Actually, the Aces had more, so that was really helpful, and they still lost by 4. Most importantly, points in the paint. That's really what it comes down to. 20-point disparity here in game 2. In game 1, not much better. It was a lot better. 4-point disparity there. So the 20 points that the Liberty outscored them by in the paint in game 2 ended up being a massive difference because they only won by 4 despite that huge difference in points down low. A'ja Wilson just needs to get involved way more. That's a huge part of this, and that's where I'm going to go now to kick it off with player props. A'ja and the points, not much of an edge for me. That's where we start with her, obviously. 22.5 that she's averaging in these playoffs. Over and 2, under and 2. If you look at her head-to-head on the season, same concept. Over and 2, under and 2 versus this Liberty squad. So the 23.5 is right at her number. Technically, she should be going a bit over this if she's at, under, if she's averaging the 22.5, but it's a 50-50 shot. So there's no edge there. I think with the points and rebounds, though, this might be a decent fade. And you look at that number for her against this squad, the points and rebounds, a little bit worse, right? Under and 4 straight. This is at 3 of 4 this season. And this number's at 34.5. If you look at the playoffs versus this team and we go to props.cash so we can see a little bit further back, I pull up A'ja Wilson on her PR, and we just want to filter this to be on the playoffs and like the last 10 of the playoffs. So you can see, let's do head-to-head rather in the playoffs. So in 2 of 6, she's gone over. That's a pretty bad percentage as well, averaging 32.2. Now, when she went over, right? 41 and 40. This would be a game that I could see her sort of coming out and being pissed that they are down 0-2, but being pissed isn't a reason to believe that all of a sudden the matchup is going to get way easier. They're not getting her involved in the right spots. And this Liberty team is very, very good at limiting centers. You can see over here, they're tops in limiting points and rebounds to centers. No one is more of a true center than A'ja Wilson, but Jonquel Jones at 6'6" is the best matchup in the league for her. The other thing about Jonquel is the rebounds. She does pull A'ja from the basket on offense because Jonquel is trying to leave those lanes open. You can see the rebounds for A'ja against this squad. Not even in the playoffs. If you just look at head-to-head as of late, 7 and 6 in these 2 games. She did go over once, but 9.5 boards. The under is a little bit, seems like a little bit better of a play. If the Liberty don't shoot well, which they didn't last game, but if they don't shoot well on the road because they are a little bit better at home, then it would make sense that there's more rebounds available. But once again, Jonquel is pulling her from the basket on offense, not allowing her to get a lot of those boards. Kelsey Plum is interesting because she had a terrible game in this last one, as kind of predicted. I just didn't think it was a good idea to go over once again, just because she had been playing so well against this team. If you look at her head-to-head against this squad, right, 24 in game 1 there and only 6 in game 2. And a big reason here for this is going to be the threes. I mean, if Kelsey Plum is not making 3 threes, she's probably not getting her points prop. It is at 16.5, which is much lower and a nicer play if you want to go over. Here's what I would say. If you're going to take an over on Kelsey Plum's points, you might as well take an over on her threes. If you look at her threes, they're at 2.5 per game, right? The over is 116, so it's not a very high implied probability. It's about 48% or 47% likely that she gets this. That's what that number is telling us. It says it's much more likely that she goes under at minus 154. But let's say she goes over. If she does, then she's made 3 threes, and I want to know how often does she hit 17 points, which is her line in this game, when she makes 3 threes. So I can do that on Props Madness by taking the 3-point filter here and going up to at least 3. So in the games this season where she's had at least 3 threes, she's obviously gotten that 100% of the times, but if you look at the points, she's hit this number in 91% of games, 21 of 23. Right, the season average is about 17, but when she makes 3 threes, she's at 21 points per game. That's going to continue to hold true. This is not an easy team to make threes against, obviously, for against the Sun. That said, it just seems like it's worth it to parlay them together, add some juice, because if she doesn't hit 3 threes, let's say she goes 0 or 2, anywhere from 0 to 2 on the season. In those situations, she's only over in 5 of 19. So it's a much better under. If you're going to take under the points, take under the threes. If you're going to take over the points, take over the threes. It's not as nicely a negative correlation that gets you more juice, but it does juice it up enough, and it's so highly correlated, you might as well do it. The last thing for Kelsey Plum, this is a vibes check. Like, she got punked by the coach in game 2, was one of the very many that Becky Hammon was going off on the bench. One of the key ones too. So I would expect a lot bigger of a bounce back at home, game 3, do or die. I think Kelsey Plum's going to come out pretty strong. Jay Young, really nice game, both games, 1 and 2, as you can see here, 17 points in both, 32 minutes a game, 31 and 33. I think that sticks around, but these numbers aren't that, there's no real edge unless you think she's going to maintain her shooting or bring it up a little bit. The case for Jackie Young going, continuing to get her points in the playoffs would be she's actually shooting pretty poorly. If you look at props.cash and look at the playoffs, in these playoffs, she's at 12.8 shots per game, only hitting about 39% of these this season. Oh, this is head-to-head, excuse me. Playoffs 2024. You can see she's taking about 13 shots, but only making 36%, right? Averaging 36% from the field. On the season, if we take the playoffs filter off and just look at the season, on the season, she is shooting 41%. So she's below her percentages. That would be a reason to go over on Jackie Young, is that she actually has some room for improvement on the shot attempts. That said, it's not like she's taking that many shots. It's just it's a real 50-50 shot here. On the season, she's at 15.6 points per game. But she hasn't really been the same since she got hurt. As you can see, all the red here at this number is coming towards the end of the season when she was hurt, playing through injury after the Olympic break. So I still don't think she's 100% right. She's just looked a little bit better in the last 2 games because she made a few more shots. But for me, it's a stay away for Jay Young. Unfortunately, it's a similar situation for Stewie. The favorite bet that I have for her is 3s under, but we don't get the edge anymore. This needs to be about -145 for me to take the under for her. If you look at her in the playoffs here on props.cash, you can see a little further back. This is not something she does in the playoffs. She just doesn't make 3s like that. If we look at her 3-pointers made in the playoffs here, I'm filtering it to be just the playoffs for the last 10 games. Over in just 2 of 10, a number of those coming against the Aces, 5 of those games coming against the Aces, and only did it once because she was super hot, but it's the amount that she takes, right? If we go down to the 3-point attempts for her, you can see in the playoffs, she's at fewer than 4 since last season in the postseason. She's got to make 2 of 4 to get there. She's not a 50% 3-point shooter. She is a 23.5% 3-point shooter in the playoffs. So for her to go 2 for 4 is just very unlikely. I'm going to continue to try to fade her, but I do want this number at about -145 for me to feel good about it. What about Sabrina? Sabrina, I just can't fade. I think you got to continue going with Sabrina. And the thing about Sabrina that actually gives us a little bit more of an edge than does taking Breanna Stewart overs is that Sabrina is playing more minutes now than she was in the regular season. You look at her Sabrina here on props.cash so we can see all the averages a little bit more easily. And I'm going to filter this for just 2024. In the regular season, she played, in the regular season here, you can see in 2024, 18.9 points per game, 32.5 minutes per game. Well, now in the playoffs, that's gone way up, right? And in game 1 against the Dream, she only needed 26 minutes because that game wasn't over by the 3rd quarter. So she sat pretty much the whole 4th, right? Other 3 games that were closer, 39, 38, and 37 minutes for Sabrina, not getting much of a breather. She's not going to want one. So if we still put her at about 38 minutes and her average on the season is 18.9 points per game, she's going to be closer to 20 to 21 throughout these playoffs at those minutes on average. So I got to keep taking Sabrina over 18.5 for like the rest of the playoffs as long as they're in it. If this number stays at about 18.5 or lower, Sabrina's going to be an automatic over on the points. You're not going to get anything from me on Jonquel in this game. I took under 15.5 points last game. That's not available anymore. It's only 14.5. I think the 14.5 is a great look. 15.5 is where I lose that edge for her. On the season, 14 points a game. Let's look at her season average for the numbers for Jonquel. If we look at her season averages here, 30 minutes per game, right? In the playoffs, not going up too much, I don't believe. 30.8 minutes per game in the playoffs. So everything's right at her averages. She continues to be an under for me, which you can see at -125 or so, or -122 on FanDuel, is going to be a higher implied probability that she goes under. So I'm going to continue to lean under here. If I can get 15.5, I have a great edge to fade her. The points at 14.5 is right on the edge, not quite enough for me to bet it. But the rebounds also at 9.5, not enough for me to bet it, although I lean under for her against Asia. Lastly, I'd love to fade Betnijah Laney Hamilton as well. The problem is now her points are down to 8.5. That's getting a little dicey, and the rebounds are only available on DFS sites like Underdog. So I don't feel comfortable giving stuff out for her. Even the points and rebounds, anything that's not points is not available for Betnijah outside of those DFS plays. But the thing about her now in this series is they love bringing Courtney Vandersloot in, and they love bringing in a couple others off the bench as well. They brought in Kayla Thornton as well, both eating into a lot of what Betnijah's minutes. She's going to be around 20 to 25 throughout the rest of these playoffs. They're really trying not to wear her out with that knee, and they like her in short spurts to bring that energy. But they also love the veteran leadership of Vandersloot and even Kayla Thornton, who brings them really solid minutes when she's on the floor and helps control the offense alongside Sabrina and Stewie. Betnijah is a little bit more of a wild card, a lot more of an athlete who's a disruptor, not really someone who plays within the offense very well. So unless she's getting wide open looks from deep, Betnijah is not really my favorite play. This is game 1. Game 2, you can also see from Betnijah, 25 minutes in that one. So that's why I say 20 to 25 minutes is probably where she's at. I'd love to go under if you give me like a PRA for her, because I think she'll continue to play about 5-minute spurts at a time and then come out. But we don't get those numbers for her just yet unless you see these on Friday before the game starts. And that is all the time I have for you guys in this one. I'm going to have the leans that I put here in the video to be clear for you in the comments of the video. That's where a pinned comment will have all that. So check that out. Also get into the description of the video. It has the links to all the tools I'm using, which have a bunch of discounts if you want some of them, as well as the discount to the VIP Discord, so you can make sure you don't miss any of the actual picks that I am placing. All right. Continue to bet safely. Until I see you next. Happy betting.